Sunday, Monday, happy days. Tuesday, Wednesday, happy days. Thursday, Friday, happy days. The weekend comes, my cycle hums, ready to race to you. These days are happy free. These days are
Hi, welcome to Floppy Days podcast number 1. I'm your host, Randy Kindig. You might be asking, what is this show about and who the heck are you? Basically, this is something I've wanted to do for quite a while. I've really been interested in vintage computing for a while. Back in the day, I had some vintage computers, which I'll talk about later. But the podcast is mainly meant to be a survey of personal computers with focus on historical significance, technical specifications, peripherals, emulation, modern upgrades, connectivity to modern computers, user groups and shows that exist today, current websites, popular magazines in the day, and even if some might exist today, popular books in the day and today, popular software, and radio TV ads. Those are the sorts of things that I'm going to really hit on during this podcast. As far as me and who I am, probably most of you out there don't know me. I haven't been that active, I guess, in the community. I don't get on forums a lot. I have attended some vintage computer shows, but just to give you some background on me, because I won't talk about myself a lot in these shows. These shows are meant to talk about vintage computers, which I love and which I want to share with you guys. But I have an engineering degree, nuclear engineering from Purdue University, and a master's degree in computer science. And the master's degree in computer science is when I really learned to love computers. Actually, I recall the first classes I took. I actually started my master's at the University of Louisville. Just to start off with a short story here, we actually used a PDP-8 in that class and programmed it. And I remember writing an assembly program and going up to the machine and flipping all the switches appropriately, moving from memory location to memory location, inputting the program. So that tells you that I've got a few years on me, and that was some time ago, obviously. I don't think too many universities use PDP-8s anymore. But I don't have any electronics training. That's something that I really would like to learn more about and become more fluent in, because specifically I do have a lot of vintage computers. They do go out occasionally. Something will go wrong. Without having that electronics knowledge, I don't really know how to fix them. So I end up either giving away those to somebody who can use them and fix them, or selling them on eBay, again, to somebody who might be able to repair them. I never will throw them away. I just don't think that. I think they're too rare to be throwing them away. But I had a love of electronics growing up. I can remember that vividly. For Christmas, I always wanted some sort of electronic thing. And of course, back in the 60s and mostly the 60s, I guess, when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of electronic type things. I remember portable radios and that sort of thing, chemistry sets, anything science-wise or things that I were interested in. I actually had a slide rule in high school. Some of you may recall using slide rules. Being an engineer, we needed some sort of device in college as well. But in college, I was able to get a calculator. I was actually able to afford, my freshman year there at Purdue, a TI-58C, which was, I guess, my very first computer. I loved that. You could actually write a program, save it on there. Since it was a 58C, meaning constant memory, when I turned it off, turned it back on, my program was still there. Never could afford the 59 though, which is something that I wanted because it had the little programmable cards that you could store your programs on. I never could really afford that though. My very first computer, I got my last or just at the very end of my schooling career for my bachelor's degree, at least in nuclear engineering. In 1979, when I graduated from Purdue, my wife bought me a TRS-80 Model 1, 4K of RAM and 4K of ROM, which was just fabulous. I mean, it was at that time, the TRS-80 Model 1, the Apple II, and the PET were the only options really available. The only for home users, for hobby users, as far as something you could just take home and hook up and use. Those were really the only three choices. So I love that TRS-80 Model 1. I remember, as quick as I could, expanding that to level 2. Is the 4K ROM was a level 1 ROM, and I upgraded it to level 2 at my local Radio Shack, and upgraded to 16K of RAM, and I thought, wow, I'm really set here. And it really did improve the usability of the machine. Sometime later, I used that machine for quite a while. Probably had it for close to 2 years. I'd say around 2 years. By that time, some better computers were coming out. And specifically, I had my eye on the Atari line of home computers with their tremendous colors, graphics capabilities, their audio capabilities, the wonderful keyboard that they had on, the expandability of them. That's just something that I decided eventually that I would sell my TRS-80 Model 1, and I wish I still had that now, obviously, and bought, after looking at the 400 and the 800, which are the only ones available at that time. The 400 was nice, but the chiclet keyboard, or not the chiclet keyboard, but the membrane keyboard, was just not what I was looking for, even though it really had the same power as the 800, same internals. I decided that the membrane keyboard wasn't for me, so I ended up buying an Atari 800 with 16K of RAM, and that was one beautiful machine. I just loved the way it hooked up to the TV. It, as I mentioned before, had great graphics and sound, pretty nice BASIC in it, and I ended up eventually getting a floppy drive for that, which was amazing to have a floppy drive instead of using cassette, and various other peripherals for it as well. So I had the Atari 800 for quite a while. I was active in some of the Atari users groups in Indianapolis at the time, and eventually the 16-bit line of machines came out, the Amiga and the Atari ST. And being an Atari guy, I decided to stick with the Atari line and ended up buying the Atari 520 ST. Just a little story to go with that. I remember buying my first Atari ST in Toys R Us, believe it or not. They had the 520 ST and the SF314 floppy drive and the monitor. They had all that in Toys R Us there for a while when it first came out. And so I bought my setup there with just a monochrome monitor. It was all I could afford at the time. I decided to get the monochrome instead of color. Because at that time or those of you that know the ST, you could either get a color or monochrome monitor. Monochrome monitor was higher resolution, but obviously just black and white, where the color monitor had all the colors available but was not as high a resolution. And eventually I ended up getting a color monitor for that. But I probably used that for another couple years. And at one point I succumbed to the pressure of the fact that I used an IBM PC at work, that my job entailed using a PC, IBM compatible PC, and decided it would make more sense just to have a similar machine at home as well. So sadly I sold my Atari ST and bought the IBM PC. I have to say that took some of the fun out of personal computing when I went to the IBM PC platform. And please, IBM PC lovers, don't send me any hate mail on that, but I just think that all the machines that came before the IBM PC are the ones that was really the exciting time, the fun time. And when everything became IBM PC compatible, things were just a little less fun, in my opinion. So, I've been using, so that was probably in the early 90s when I ended up getting the IBM PC. Could have been earlier than that, maybe it was the late 80s. And time tends to get away from you. I had been using IBM compatible machines since then. And probably about 5 years ago, I decided to think about, I always had the interest in the vintage computers, and I just wondered whether it was still possible to get some of those old machines just for nostalgia and to bring some of that fun back. So I started looking on eBay, and I could not believe that every machine that I remember from the 80s was available. I mean, you could buy it. Most of them were not expensive. And I decided to start doing some vintage computer collecting. So my areas of focus having to do with vintage computers revolves around the more common at least, American computers from the late 70s to the mid to late 80s. That's really my area of interest, because it's really the period of time that I owned the vintage machines that I had so much fun with. Prior to that, the early ones, I never was involved with the Altairs or any of those really early machines from more like the mid 70s. As I said, my first machine was a TRS-80 Model 1. So kind of from that point through the 16-bit machines, although I really have more interest in the 8-bit computers, is where my focus lies and what I'm going to focus most on in this show. I also have a strong interest in programmable vintage calculators. So I'm not interested in, the really old calculators that all they could do was add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But again, from the early TI, beginning with the 57, 55, somewhere in there, and the HP programmable calculators, I have an interest in those, and I've collected a few of those as well along the way, so you'll hear me talk about those as well. I have a strong interest in books. I've always loved books. I've always loved technical books. So I have a huge library of vintage computer books that I've acquired over the last 5 years, and also vintage computer magazines to go along with that. I remember in the day I was very interested in and usually had subscriptions to the common vintage computer magazines like Analog and Antique, and for the Atari 8-bit line, and Start and ST-Log for the Atari ST line. So you'll hear me talk about books and magazines as well. Space Invaders was always one of my favorite games, vintage computer games. So one of the things that I've done is try to get what the best or favorite Space Invader clones are on each platform that I purchased. So when I talk about all the different machines I have, on every single platform I've tried to get whatever the best Space Invaders clones are on that platform. So you hear me talk about that as well. Assembly language, having a computer background, having the master's in computer science, got a strong interest in assembly language, and really programming the early vintage calculators was like programming in assembly language. But I did learn to program in assembly language on my TRS-80 Model 1. I did as well on my Atari 8-bit computers. But the ST I never did learn Motorola 68000 assembly language. By that time, I guess I just didn't really have time. I have a strong interest, and it's really cool that there are a lot of modern enhancements to vintage computers these days. So just about any computer you can buy add-ons that allow the machines to talk to modern computers, to interface with them, to use them as file servers, to basically just allow them to communicate with each other. And you can also typically add memory well beyond what you could in the day, and other enhancements as well. I've acquired a lot of those sorts of enhancements for my vintage computers along the way, so I certainly will talk about that. And then emulators. There seem to be, for just about any of the vintage platforms that you can think of, there are emulators, and very good emulators in many cases, for certainly the Windows and DOS platforms, and a lot of them on the Mac platform as well. I have had a chance to play with some of those emulators. I have to say that I prefer the real hardware. I love the feel of the real hardware, but emulators are certainly, some machines are too rare, too costly, too valuable for me to ever acquire them in my collection, so using emulators is certainly the way to go. Okay, what I wanted to do next was go through a summary of my collection. It's not anything real esoteric. I don't have any real rare machines or rare calculators or anything like that. A lot of you out there probably have more hardware than I have in terms of diversity, but I do have representative samples of all of the major American 8-bit machines from the late 70s through the mid 80s. So these are all the machines that I grew up with, knew about, wanted somewhere along the way. So first of all, my calculator collection, I've got a TI 58C and 59. As I mentioned, the 58C is what I had when I was in college. I have since been able to, and I still have my original 58C, which is in excellent condition. And then I have a 59, which I purchased. The magnetic reader doesn't work on it, and it's something I'd like to get fixed. But I have bought new battery packs for both the 58C and the 59. So other than the magnetic reader on the 59, they work well. I also have acquired some other vintage HP calculators that they started with the programmable graphing calculators after the 58 and 59. So I have an TI 86, an 82, an 83. So there's still some others I'd like to acquire there, but I do have those. I have a PC 100C printer, which the 58 and 59 attached to. I'm sure most of you have seen those before. The 58C and the 59 actually sit on top of this printer. It uses thermal paper. It also provides power to the calculator. The calculators actually there's actually a key that secures the calculator to the printer. I always wanted one of those when I had my calculators, and luckily at this point I've been able to acquire one. I have a TI 74 and 95, which are really more like handheld computers rather than calculators. But they actually both run on BASIC, very similar machines, and I will definitely be talking about those at some point in time. I have some of the TRS-80 pocket computers, particularly the PC2, PC3, and PC6. They made PC1 through PC8, actually. I acquired the ones that I was most interested in and that were most popular for whatever reason. The PC3 is a very powerful one, but again, I will talk about those in more detail in a future podcast. I have a TRS-80 Model 100, which is the small notebook-like computer from Radio Shack. It is considered by many to be one of the first portable, or one of the most popular first portable computers. It was very popular with journalists in particular. An LCD screen on it, and a very nice machine. I used to program one of those for my father for his business. I have a TRS-80 Model 1. As I had mentioned, that was my first home computer. I've been lucky enough to acquire a working with those. Those don't go cheaply, so that's probably the rarest of any of the machines that I have. I have the keyboard computer, and I have the cassette player for it, and I have cables that allow me to hook it to a regular monitor. I do not have one of the monitors that came with the original system. The original system was a package with the computer built into the keyboard, a cassette recorder, and a black and white monitor. But I still want to acquire a monitor someday. It's just that I already have a lot of monitors and they take up a lot of room. So I'm fine hooking it up to one of my existing monitors. I also have a Tandy Coco 2, which is the Tandy color computer. Those were the next generation after the TRS-80 Model 1, Model 3, and they also had a Model 4, which were the black and white. But the color computer, they had the original color computer. You may remember they had chiclet keyboard on it. There's a Coco 2, and then a Coco 3 was the latest generation of those. At one point I had a Coco 3, but quit working, and I ended up giving it away at a vintage computer festival. So I still have a Coco 2, and I still want to acquire a Coco 3. Those are very interesting machines, and again, I'll talk about those. The Atari 8-bit line, I've got 4 different machines. As I had mentioned, I really was an Atari enthusiast during the day, and started out with an 800, so I certainly had to acquire one of those, and it's still one of my all-time favorite machines. I was able to get a 400, which is the membrane keyboard version. I have an 800 XL, which I also owned in the day. After my 800 had broken, I had gotten an 800 XL, and I also acquired a 65 XE, which was the next generation after the XL series, and I had always wanted to own one of those but had never been able to. And I have a lot of the peripherals associated with all those lines as well. I have a VIC-20, so getting into the Commodore line here. I have many Commodore machines as well. I have a VIC-20, I have a Commodore 64, I have a Commodore 64C, which was the cost-reduced newer version of the Commodore 64. And I have a Commodore 128, which is a very, very nice machine as well. And I will certainly be talking about all of those in future podcasts. I have a TI-99 4A, which I remember when that machine came out, and being an engineer, this machine coming from Texas Instruments and really being from a calculator company, I had a strong interest in this machine when it came out. Although it was very expensive when it first came out, I do not have the disk drive or other such peripherals with it because they're very bulky and very expensive. I have in the Apple line, I never did own an Apple in the day, and I had always wanted to. Since then, I have been able to acquire an Apple IIe, which works very well. I fairly recently acquired an Apple IIc, which needs a little bit of work on the keyboard because the keyboard sticks, but other than that, the machine works well. And I have an Apple IIgs that I just got at Vintage Computer Festival Midwest in October of 2012. So I actually haven't gotten that fully cleaned up, and it was tested before I bought it, so I know everything works, but I'm anxious to get that cleaned up and actually do something with it. I have a Timex Sinclair 1000, which was a very inexpensive machine in the day, one of the least expensive that you could purchase here in the United States, and a whole black and white machine, and with a membrane keyboard. And I have a back on the Tandy again, I have a Tandy MC10, which is the smaller cousin to the Coco, the color computer, and it's an interesting machine. And I have something that I never even knew existed prior to a few months ago, something called the Aquarius. It's not something I really ever knew about in the day or wanted to own, but there was a nice version, boxed version available on eBay, and I snapped it up just as something to play with. So I will likely devote a podcast to that as well. I have other machines that I still want to acquire at some point. Again, I mentioned I was an Atari enthusiast. I had an ST in the day, and I would like to get an ST again someday. Although, I guess I'm less concerned about getting the 16-bit computers at this point because I've been focusing mainly to this point on the 8-bit machines. The Amiga 500 is another machine. Amiga is something that, being an Atari guy, I really always had a negative attitude towards the Commodore machines. They were a mortal enemy, so to speak. And even though I never owned an Amiga, it's something that I secretly always wanted to play with. So still would like to own one day to play with and to get more familiar with. A Sinclair ZX Spectrum, something that really wasn't very popular in the US, but was popular in Europe. I would like to get one of those to play with. The Coleco Atom was something that was fairly popular in the US. That would be nice. They're fairly expensive to buy a good working model. As far as the TI or as the TRS-80 line, I mentioned I own a Model 1. I do not own nor have ever owned a Model 3, and I would like to. The all-in-one with the disk drives. I've never had the disk drives on the TRS-80 Model 1 or Model 3 type machines. So those are really the machines I would like to acquire. So those are the machines that I mentioned are the ones that I'm planning on really focusing on in this podcast. If there are other machines out there that you guys would like to hear about or have a podcast about, I mean, I would be happy if someone wanted to loan me a machine such as an Acorn or an Amiga 500 or a Coleco Atom, something like that. If somebody had one that they wanted to loan me, I'd be happy to do a podcast on those, and then I could return those to you. There might be other machines that were more popular in Europe that would be very interesting to learn more about as well, and I'd be happy to do those. So that doesn't mean I won't do a podcast on those particular machines, because there are emulators out there, and I could certainly just focus on emulation or what I learn about them through the emulation, through what's on what I can find on the internet. But it's always better to have the real machine in front of you. This show, as I mentioned, is mainly going to be a survey of vintage computers and calculators. And the machines I mentioned that I own are the ones that I'm initially going to focus on. But I may do some others as well that were common machines that I do not own. I'm going to base this podcast on the timeline that's at www.oldcomputers.net, which has a timeline of when all of the most popular machines came out. It's a very detailed timeline. I'm going to try to move my way through that timeline and really focus on the most popular machines. When possible, I mean, I certainly am not an expert on many of these machines. I was on the Atari in the day and the TRS-80 Model 1, but beyond that, I am not an expert on any of the other machines. So I would try to do interviews when possible. If there are people out there who are experts on any of these particular machines, could you please drop me a line and let me know if you would be willing to do an interview, because I would love to do some interviews and learn some more things myself about some of these machines. So here's what I plan. In the beginning, I mentioned the things I'm going to really talk about, but I've got a template put together of the sorts of things that I plan to cover on each of the machines that I talk about, machines and or calculators. The day in history, other popular machines that were already on the market, the cost of the machine when it was announced, history leading up to the machine being developed, some radio, TV, and magazine ads. I always get a kick out of looking at or watching old ads from that time period for those particular machines. Personal memories and stories of each of those machines, each of the machines that I cover. I plan to talk about technical specifications such as the CPU that was utilized, the memory options, what type of keyboard, what sort of ports it had on it, the video resolutions that were and are available, the audio capabilities, the operating system, and in some case operating systems that were built in and or available for the machine. I'm going to cover peripherals such as storage devices, cassette, disc, whatever else there might be or have been, joysticks, modems, printers, monitors, expansion peripherals, popular books, magazines, and software for those machines. And in particular, as I mentioned, I'm a Space Invaders enthusiast, so I will talk about Space Invaders clones available for each of the platforms and assembly language software that is available for each of the platforms. Modern upgrades. A lot of the machines have some modern upgrade capability, so such as memory expansion, other types of expansion, storage alternatives such as compact flash or other types of media, USB or whatever. Connectivity to modern computers. Most of the machines, I know most of the machines at least that I own, have some way to connect them to modern computers and transfer information. Emulation. I will certainly talk about emulators for each of the platforms. User groups and shows that were in existence at one time and what's available today. And then current websites. What are the most popular current websites that are out there? And it's amazing how many there are. I have spent the last 2 to 3 years compiling a fairly extensive list of websites that I could find for each of the major platforms. And although it's certainly not comprehensive, I'm willing to share that with you guys. So that's the plan. I'm going to go ahead and end this show. It looks like I'm about 35 minutes into it. I plan for these shows to be in the 30 to 60 minute range, so they won't be too long. If you want to contact me, please contact me. I have a voicemail box at 206-984-0243, and the name of this podcast is Floppy Days. You can contact me at floppydays@gmail.com. And my first podcast, I'm a little bit torn. I'm thinking either to focus on one of my calculators, if I'm going to start early in the timeline that I had mentioned, or I might talk about the Altair, which was one of the very important early machines, of which I do not have an example. And another possibility would be to start in with the TRS-80 Model 1, which was one of the earliest of the machines that I do have in my collection. So I will let you know, or I guess you'll find out when the first podcast comes out, as far as what we're going to talk about. Please feel free to contact me. I welcome any and all comments, and I hope someone out there finds this valuable or interesting to listen to. Thank you.